everybody's talking about this amazing rescue mission to extract two U.S. airmen whose aircraft was downed over Iran, and they ended up in the mountains, and they were rescued in this incredible mission by the Americans. Now, I believe that this whole situation, the downing of the aircraft, but really the rescue mission and how it all turned out, is actually a major event in this war, not some sort of like sidebar, where, oh, the aircraft was down, they were in danger, thank God they're safe. That's not the story. This actually might be a major turning point in the war, and I will explain this in detail. Stick around till the end of this video. A lot of people are missing how critically important this event actually is. So first, we're going to listen to the remarks by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth from the press conference yesterday. It was an amazing press conference. I actually watched the whole hour and a half thing, and not just because I'm a nerd for this stuff, but it was actually a very interesting press conference. And we heard from President Trump and CIA Director Ratcliffe and Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Kane. And then there were questions, and it was actually very interesting. They laid out a lot of details about the mission. And of course, we're not going to play the whole thing, but I want to listen to what Secretary Hegseth has to say in his prepared remarks. And then I will explain why this event is a major turning point in this war, even more important than a lot of the bombing raids and other things that are going on here. Okay, so let's get right to Secretary of War Hegseth. Okay, let me pull this up. Here we go.
Okay. Well, John, thank you for the collaboration of the CIA as well. Incredible and ongoing partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, and especially the brave warriors in our armed forces, over this Easter weekend, the United States military has once again proved why we possess the greatest fighting force the world has ever known. In two extraordinary combat search and rescue operations deep inside enemy territory in Iran, our warriors executed missions of breathtaking skill, courage, and precision. When our warriors are unleashed, as this president has allowed them to be, they are unstoppable. When American airmen were down behind enemy lines, our forces and our president did not hesitate. Special operators supported by elite air crews and intelligence professionals moved swiftly and decisively into treacherous mountain terrain under the constant threat of Iranian forces closing in. Ultimately, it was an impotent Iranian threat. And today, as the CIA director mentioned, Iran's military, and we know this, is embarrassed and humiliated, and they should be. Now, these are not routine operations. They were high-risk, high-stakes missions conducted in the heart of enemy territory. This was not just barely into Iran. This was deep into Iran, involving coordinated strikes to suppress threats, deception tactics to protect our teams, and full synchronization across air, ground, and special operations. The Iranians are still asking themselves right now, how did the Americans do this? One downed airman evaded capture for more than a day, scaling rugged ridges while hunted by the enemy. When he was finally able to activate his emergency transponder, his first message was simple, and it was powerful. He sent a message: God is good. In that moment of isolation and danger, his faith and fighting spirit shone through. You see, shot down on a Friday, Good Friday, hidden in a cave, a crevice, all of Saturday, and rescued on Sunday. Flown out of Iran as the sun was rising on Easter Sunday. A pilot reborn, all home and accounted for, a nation rejoicing. God is good. Despite incoming fire and unforgiving conditions, our troops brought every American home. No American lives were lost. We leave no man behind, and that is not luck. It's the result of unmatched training, superior technology, an unbreakable warrior ethos, and sheer American grit. Our special operators, pilots, and support crews performed with near perfection under fire, and they were lethal. Just ask any Iranian soldier who dared attempt to get anywhere near that pilot before or during that mission. Death from above. Our troops turned a potential tragedy into a resounding demonstration of American resolve and capability. That's what excellence in uniform looks like. But make no mistake about it. None of this would have been possible without the courageous leadership and ironclad determination of President Donald J. Trump. From the moment our airmen went down, President Trump made it clear we will leave no one behind. The first mission, the first of two, was an audacious daylight thunder run right up the middle. It was authorized in less than 2 hours from that pilot going down when we knew where he was. And it was authorized in the middle of the night, because anybody that's worked for this man knows he's up in the middle of the night. Authorized immediately, without hesitation, audaciously. The second mission, as soon as we knew where that pilot was, and John was certainly helpful in that, also executed immediately. You know, I looked up at my screen when the final mission was complete inside our SCIF, our secure facility. And we have a running VTC, a running coordination cell. And the top of it read 45 minutes and 45 hours and 56 minutes. For 45 hours and 56 minutes, we held that call open for coordination. From the moment our pilots went down, our mission was unblinking. The call never dropped, the meeting never stopped, the planning never ceased. The president demanded rapid, decisive action. He backed our military with the full weight of his resolve, refusing to let enemy propaganda or tactical setbacks deter us. His leadership ensured that every lethal and non-lethal resource was brought to bear, that our forces had the authorities and the support they needed to succeed. When the president says he has the backs of our warfighters, he means it. And it means a great deal, and it's a big difference on the battlefield. President Trump understands that peace through strength is not a slogan. It is a doctrine that saves American lives. His unwavering commitment to rebuilding our military and restoring the warrior spirit has paid dividends in missions just like this one. Under his command, America projects power with confidence and brings our people home with victory. And that continues today, by the way. Per the president's direction, today will be the largest volume of strikes since day one of this operation. Tomorrow, even more than today. And then Iran has a choice. Choose wisely, because this president does not play around. You can ask Soleimani, you can ask Maduro, you can ask Khomeini. To those heroes who planned and executed these rescues, your nation stands in awe. I stand in awe. The chairman stands in awe. We all stand in awe of your professionalism and bravery. We serve for you. You embody the very best of America. To the rescued airmen and their families, welcome home. Your courage and endurance, the quiet declaration of faith amid the storm, inspires us all. God is good every day. And to our adversaries watching from Tehran, let this be a clear message. The United States military will go anywhere, at any time, to protect our own and complete the mission. We execute with precision. We control the skies. You see, we flew for 7 hours in daylight over Iran to get the first pilot. And we flew 7 hours in the middle of the night to get the second. And Iran did nothing about it. We fight with honor, and under President Trump's leadership, we win. So God bless our troops, God bless President Trump, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
All right. So that was Secretary of War Hegseth. And again, like I said, I believe that this rescue mission is actually a major turning point in the war and far more important than even most people realize. Let me explain what I'm talking about here. You see, he started off, let's just go through what he said in that speech, because what he said was echoed in the other talks in this press conference as well. I know it sounds crazy to be recommending an hour and a half press conference, but it's actually really interesting to watch, especially General Kane's remarks, where he goes through more of the details of the mission. If you're interested in that, you want to watch that. So he taught by saying God is great and invoking Easter. And you see what he did there also, if you know about the story of Jesus, where he talks about how the pilot was downed on Good Friday and was in a cave. And then he says in a cave or crevice, and then rescued on Easter Sunday, a pilot reborn. Right. So he's using the Jesus imagery here, but giving religious significance to this event. Now, who's he talking to in this? He's not just talking to Christians. He's not just being a Christian. He's also talking to the Iranians. He's very conscious of the fact that the Iranians are hanging on every single word. Let me remind us, okay, and this is critical to understanding everything I'm saying in this video. The Iranians are not trying in any way, shape, or form to win militarily. To them, the psychological war is everything. This is why they went to war in the first place. Let me back up. During the negotiations leading up to the war, I made it very clear. I wrote a column in the Jerusalem Post. I made multiple videos. If you've been watching this channel, I hammered this point every day, and also in other media appearances I made in various media outlets. I kept saying, and I continue to say, the Iranians the reason that they didn't cut a deal is that they still believe, that the greatest threat to their regime is the Iranian people. And that so long as they can weather the storm of American military action, no matter how devastating that military action is, as long as they can remain in power when the dust settles, when this war is over, they can keep their heads down till the end of the Trump administration. They'll have the Chinese help. They'll have Russian help. They will rebuild. They can stay in power. That is their goal. And they determined before the war started that they had a better chance of surviving by going to war than by capitulating to the U.S. demands and looking weak in the eyes of their people. Because capitulating to the U.S. demands would mean no more proxies, no more ballistic missiles, no more oppressing their own people, no more nuclear program, right? All these things that it meant, if they gave into those things, then they would be so weak internally that could bring down the regime. Okay, so the whole issue of narrative control is critical to this war. It's the whole war for the Iranians. Again, they're not trying to win militarily. And what's also important here is that, for the regime, this is a religious war. They say it all the time. That's the whole basis of their regime. That's the whole basis of death to Israel, death to America, right? Is jihad and bringing the Mahdi and the Shiite theology. And therefore, framing the remarks, when you have U.S. officials, and again, Hegseth wasn't the only one in this press conference, when you have U.S. officials invoking Christian symbolism, invoking God, that is speaking the language of the Iranian regime. And it's so refreshing, because what we're used to is that Western leaders will talk in terms of the military strategy and the tactics and the politics and the diplomacy, and they'll kind of keep the real issue out of it. It's kind of like what's happened with Hamas and Israel, where Hamas launches the war on October 7th. Hamas called the October 7th attacks a name. The name they gave the October 7th attacks was the Al-Aqsa flood. They literally named the attacks after the Temple Mount. Al-Aqsa is the Muslim name for the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem's nowhere near the Gaza Strip. They named it that because they were saying that this is a religious war. They're fighting this is like the continuation of the wars between the Muslims and the Crusaders to conquer Jerusalem. That's what it's about. They gave it a religious significance. But what does the West do? They say, well, it's about, they want a Palestinian state, and they want they want a two-state solution, or they want to end the occupation of the Israelis. All these things that Hamas themselves doesn't say. Hamas frames it as a religious war. Same thing with Iran. To Iran, this is an ideological, spiritual, religious conflict. And it's nice to hear the West finally saying, okay, it is. And God is great, meaning our God is great. And invoking that Christian symbolism, that is a real slap in the face. That's a punch in the face to the Iranian regime. That's one way that this is significant. There's more. I have a whole list here. Number two, this was the first ground operation of this war. It wasn't meant to be a ground invasion, and it wasn't, but it was actually a ground operation. And it was executed flawlessly. It involved 0 U.S. casualties, 0. It was extremely complex into an extremely dangerous part of Iran. The Iranians on the ground were hunting these airmen. They weren't just hunting these airmen. They put out a bounty on their heads and offered rewards for anyone in Iran who would find these airmen. They were scrambling to locate these airmen and capture them. And of course, they have home field advantage. They're there, and they couldn't find them. They couldn't get to them. They were pursuing them. And it was in that context that this complicated mission, the Americans went in. There were no casualties. Okay, we'll get back to this issue in a moment, that the Iranians were pursuing them. But the fact that we have this ground operation that involved no casualties sends a message to everybody. It sends a message to everybody about what's coming next in the war. Not that there's necessarily going to be a ground invasion, but in terms of possibilities, what it signals to U.S. citizens is very important here. Because for U.S. citizens who are concerned about troops on the ground, who are concerned about soldiers getting killed, who are concerned, right? What does this mission show? This mission shows the overwhelming dominance of the U.S. forces. So there's a lot of the naysayers about this war. One of the things they've been saying is, oh, it's great that we can bomb from the air, but once we get in on the ground, oh, it's going to be a whole different story, and there's going to be piles of casualties. Look at what just happened. So I'm not saying this guarantees no casualties if the U.S. goes in on the ground. What I'm saying is that this is an indicator. It's a very important indicator to the U.S. citizens that no soldiers left behind. You notice that he stressed that there. All the speakers at the press conference did, and also the overwhelming superiority of the U.S. when they do go in on the ground. Now, what it also signals to Iran about ground operations is huge. It's a huge signal to Iran about how impotent they are. And you saw that Hegseth stressed that. He talked about how they could do nothing, that their airplanes flew in 7 hours during the day, 7 hours during the night in Iranian airspace. They did this extraction, and the Iranians were impotent to do anything about it. He talked about how they are humiliated. Okay, remember, he used that term. They're humiliated. They're struggling to figure out how this happened, right? And everyone talked about this. Ratcliffe also mentioned that they're humiliated. Trump also mentioned it. And when you hear them saying that, it sounds kind of like trash talk, but it's not. The humiliation factor is not a sidebar. It's not trash talk. It is the war itself. I mean, again, I cannot stress this point enough. The humiliation is the war. It is the victory, more so than this or that bombing and destruction, because of what I said at the beginning. Iran is not measuring victory or defeat based on how much damage is done, based on the quantity or scope of airstrikes. That's not how they're measuring victory or defeat. You get it? So, ironically, this rescue mission probably does more for American victory than a lot of the bombings did. Of course, you had to have the bombings too. You got to destroy their infrastructure. You got to destroy their weapons. But let me go further. Let me really explain this, because this is so important. It's so important. Let me also, mention something else here before we move on to this, because this is really important. When you think back to World War II, okay, one of the things that comes up a lot in the discussion of this war, the war against Hamas, is how do you defeat an evil ideology? Right now, a lot of people invoke World War II, where you had Nazi Germany, you had an entire population indoctrinated by this genocidal ideology, or not an entire population, a large population, a whole country. And you have Imperial Japan under Hirohito in World War II. Also, a genocidal ideology. The atrocities they committed in the Far East against other Asian nations are they're actually on par with what the Nazis did in Europe. It's crazy. Two supremacist, racial supremacist, genocidal ideologies. And they were basically ended. They were ended as real forces in the world. Why? Well, the reason is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt made a speech in the middle of the war where he declared that the only acceptable end to World War II would be unconditional surrender by the Germans and the Japanese. And he included Mussolini in Italy, but unconditional surrender. Okay. And in fact, there was an attempt at a conditional surrender by the Germans earlier, before the end of the war, and the Americans rejected it. Okay, there has to be unconditional surrender. Why did there have to be unconditional surrender? Because the only effective way, the only way to have a chance at defeating an ideology, and I'm not saying you're going to defeat Shiite Islam, but in terms of in the mindset of the people, I'm not talking about the leaders. I'm not talking about eradicating every single person. You still have people in the world who believe in Nazism. It's not my point. But when you bring it to its knees, when you bring it to the point of humiliation, where there's no way to spin it as victory, that's the key. There's no way in anyone's mind to spin it as anything other than a humiliating defeat. And that only comes through unconditional surrender, because otherwise you leave open the possibility that the other side is going to successfully spin it as victory. This is especially a problem when we're dealing with Islam, which doesn't measure victory and defeat in terms of, as I said, scope of destruction. They only measure it in terms of survival to fight another day, or humiliation. You've probably heard a lot about how the Muslim culture and the Middle Eastern culture, Persian culture, is very into honor. There's like an honor society. That's why you have like honor killings, right? They'll kill their own family members for family honor. Humiliation is very key. So when you look at the propaganda coming out of the Iranian regime, they're trying to project to the Iranian people that they're still strong and that they're still in power and that they still have their honor, right? That's what they're always doing in the narrative warfare. So when you humiliate them, when the Iranian people all see what just happened, or if they see what just happened, they're like, oh my gosh, the humiliation is critical to the actual destruction of the regime's power. Going back to what I said before, the enemy that the regime is most worried about is their own people. And if they look weak in front of their own people, that is a greater threat to the regime than all the bombing. This event, this extraction is a humiliation of the Iranian people. Okay? We always have to remember this, that they're not fighting to win militarily. So to understand how this, let me put this another way. Well, you know what? Here's the best thing to do with this. Let's go over to Iranian state media. Okay. Before we do that, please make sure that you're getting all my content. That means go to Israel 365 News YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe there and watch all the content. We put a lot of interviews up there. Also some analytical pieces similar to what I do here on this channel. But especially lately, we've been doing a lot more important interviews. And we're going to be posting another one today. But make sure that you catch all the content on the Israel 365 News YouTube channel, especially go into the playlist section and find the playlist Israel, the Rise of a Regional Superpower. And make sure to see that. It's a 6-part series, 6 short videos that really lay out the geopolitics of how things have changed for Israel in the Middle East since October 7th. Now, let's take a look at how the Iranian state media is talking about this event, this extraction of these pilots. Okay, because that will really solidify everything I'm saying. Okay, it's the best way to explain it. So this is WANA. WANA is Iranian state media, and generally it says top news, but it's never really news. It's always analytical pieces. It's just the positions of the regime and trying to shape narratives. So they have one article about this whole thing. It's right here: rescue operation of an American pilot in Iran. What do Tehran and Washington say? So of course it wants to sound like real journalism and real analysis, but let's go through this piece and what we're looking for. Okay, this is I'm showing you how to read a piece like this. Okay, what we're looking for when we read this is what they're trying to do with the story. Okay, so here we go. When Iranian officials speak of a failure by the United States in its attempt to rescue the pilot of a downed fighter jet in central Iran, accounts published in American media present a very different picture. A complex, costly, and multi-stage operation that, according to Washington, succeeded in extracting at least one member of the F-15 crew from inside Iran. So they're denying that there was a second one who was rescued. We'll see more of that soon. And it goes through some of the details of what happened, and that people heard things in the Isfahan area. Look what it says here. Meanwhile, some field sources and media outlets close to Iranian official institutions, they always do this. They just say some sources and some experts. They do this all the time on this site, which is just them framing what they're about to say as though it has some authority. So some field sources and media outlets close to Iranian official institutions. This is a media outlet close to Iranian official institutions. That's what WANA is. Anyway, they claimed that several American forces were killed during the operation. However, no independent or official confirmation from international or U.S. sources regarding possible casualties has been released so far. You see the language here. They're trying to plant the possibility, plant the doubt, plant the possibility that Americans were killed. And then let's go to the key issues here. Here we go. Let me get to it. Tehran's narrative. America failed. Trump is managing public perceptions. Now they're going to present the two narratives. Following initial claims by Donald Trump about the rescue of a second pilot, Iranian officials quickly responded, seeking to challenge Washington's narrative. A spokesperson for the Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters said, quote, "The enemy's desperate efforts, despite divine support and the timely joint operations of Iranian forces," I don't know what they mean there, including the IRGC, the army, Basij, and law enforcement, failed to rescue their downed pilot. Trump is trying to create ambiguity in public opinion to justify the bitter failure and incompetence of his weak military. The IRGC also described Trump's claim as an attempt to cover up a military failure, stating Trump, in an attempt to conceal his heavy defeat, claimed in a tweet that a special operation had rescued a pilot of crashed aircraft in Iran. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Speaker of Iran's parliament, responded with sarcasm. If the United States achieves 3 more victories like this, it will be completely destroyed. These positions indicate that Tehran, regardless of the ultimate fate of the American crew, is attempting to frame the operation as evidence of U.S. military vulnerability deep inside Iranian territory. There you go. That's the punchline. That's the end of their description of Tehran's narrative, that it was a failure, that they hadn't really rescued the 2 pilots, and that they indicate that Tehran is attempting to frame the operation as evidence of U.S. military vulnerability. Okay, now, the U.S. narrative. On the other side, reports in American media present a completely different picture. According to these accounts, 2 crew members of an F-15E Strike Eagle, reportedly the first U.S. fighter jet shot down in this month-long conflict, ejected after their aircraft was hit on Friday. One was quickly rescued, not so quickly, but okay. But the weapons systems, see, the reason they say one was quickly rescued is as though to say, well, that was an easy one, and we really didn't have a shot at him anyway. One was quickly rescued, which is not true. It was also a very complex mission because they're humiliated by the fact that the Americans went so deeply in under fire by them and did this so successfully. Okay, one was quickly rescued, but the weapons systems officer remained hidden in mountainous terrain for more than 24 hours. One account attributed to senior U.S. military officials stated, quote, "Locating the downed officer armed with only a sidearm and hiding behind enemy lines was among the highest priorities of the U.S. military over the past 48 hours. Another senior official described the mission as one of the most difficult and complex special operations in U.S. history." That is true. According to this narrative, special forces from Navy SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force, supported by extensive air intelligence, cyber, and space assets, ultimately succeeded in extracting the wounded officer. These sources also claim that after the mission, 2 transport aircraft intended to evacuate personnel encountered problems, and U.S. commanders decided to destroy them to prevent them from falling into Iranian hands. Also true. Donald Trump also claimed, quote, no American fatalities were reported among the rescue team. All commandos and the weapons systems officer returned safely. If this account is accurate, what Iran describes as the destruction of American aircraft may not necessarily indicate a total failure of the rescue mission, but rather reflect the logistical costs of a high-risk yet successful operation. The narrative gap. Victory for whom? At present, what stands out most is not just the operation itself, but the deep gap between the 2 official narratives. Tehran says the U.S. entered deep into Iranian territory, lost multiple aircraft, and failed to achieve its objective. Washington, however, claims the primary mission, extracting the remaining crew member, was accomplished, albeit at high cost, not really, and under extremely difficult conditions. The reality on the ground likely lies somewhere in between these 2 accounts. If the U.S. did indeed extract one of its crew from inside Iran, that would represent a significant tactical success for the Pentagon. But if that success came with the loss of multiple aircraft, exposure of the scale of the confrontation, and signs of vulnerability, Tehran can equally claim a political and psychological victory. At this stage, until independent imagery, satellite evidence, or multilateral confirmations emerge, whatever that means, this case is less a purely military operation and more a battle over narrative, credibility, and control of public perception. A battle that, for both Tehran and Trump, may be just as important as the battlefield itself. They always reveal their real strategy in the final lines of these pieces. Amazing. They say it right here. And maybe just as important as the battlefield itself, because it's a battle for public perception. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Look at what they're doing here. They have to frame this that it wasn't successful. It's so important to them. Here's just in case you're even wondering for a second if maybe what they're saying is true. Of course it's not true. It's absurd to believe that what they're saying is true, because if the airmen had not been rescued, they would go find him. They'd keep searching for him. They'd display the body or have him in captivity or whatever it is. This is a total humiliation, a total humiliation of the Iranian regime. And if you want, in other regime media, on Tasnim, which is the IRGC media outlet, they're actually claiming that it was completely unsuccessful. Look at this. Images emerge of downed U.S. aircraft in central Iran. The spokesperson for the Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters of Iran announced that on Sunday that Iranian military forces have destroyed several U.S. aircraft in southern Isfahan, thwarting an attempted mission to rescue a downed American fighter pilot. They just say it was thwarted. He said the incident followed desperate efforts by U.S. forces to infiltrate central Iran to extract the pilot. According to them, it failed. They didn't get him out. This is what they're claiming. It's amazing. Okay. So this is a disaster, an absolute disaster for the Iranians. Let me just sum this video up. It's gone a little long, but I cannot stress this enough. To understand how this is actually potentially a major turning point in the war, just consider the results in all the areas that I've outlined where this was important, had this gone another way. Imagine had they not successfully extracted the airmen, or imagine if a whole bunch of American soldiers were killed in the process. Imagine these soldiers getting captured by the Iranians and then paraded around in public or held in prisons, and suddenly they're holding a couple of Americans. Think about the impact that would have on the negotiations over Hormuz, over on Trump's on Trump's ultimatums and on public perception back in the U.S., the American home front and public opinion. If there were American men who were now captured in the hands of the IRGC, imagine the wind in their sails that it would give to the Iranian regime to show some sign of victory and of strength and resilience. And also the prospects. Think about the prospects for a potential ground operation on Karg Island or somewhere else. Think about all the implications had this gone the other way in terms of what it would look like for the Iranians, what it would look like for the American people, what it would look like for the war going forward versus how it turned out. And if you think that through, you realize that this is actually a major turning point in the war. And then finally, I'll circle back to what Hegseth started with and what we started with, which is the religious element, the faith element, bringing in God and Christianity as part of the humiliation of the Iranian regime. This is speaking the language of victory, and it's speaking the language that the regime understands. That's why I believe that this rescue operation of these two airmen might be the single most important event in this war thus far in terms of actually ultimately driving towards victory. Humiliation of the regime is not a sideshow. It is going to be determinative in terms of whether or not the regime survives. So that's my take on this thing. I'm sorry this video went a little long. I hope it was interesting. Hope you enjoyed it. Please share and tell people about this channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And drop me a comment. Let me know what you thought of this video. May God bless you. May God bless all the fighting men on the ground, and may we see victory very soon.